And folks, I said then we have to restore the soul of the country. And I meant it. The second reason why, the soul of the country, I find, most of you don't know much about my state. My state is, everybody thinks it's a big industrial state. The largest town in my state is 85,000 people. The next largest is 20,000 people, and all the rest is much smaller than that. We're on what's called the Delmarva Peninsula, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. Agriculture is our single biggest industry. It happens to be mostly broiler chickens, but the point is that, by the way, it's a $5 billion industry in that whole peninsula, okay? So if you take the whole peninsula, we're as big as y'all, as they say, okay? But folks, it's just basic, what I find is that most of the way we were all raised, I suspect you were raised here the same way I was, you're taught that, as my mother would say, if you said half the things the president said, you get your mouth washed out with soap. But all kidding aside, it's just not the lack of decency, the way we talk and treat people. But the real soul of America is the middle class. And the middle class is in trouble, and particularly working folks as well. Because, look, the middle class is basically being able to send your kids somewhere when they go out to a park, they come home safely, to go to a school where they're going to be safe, that if they do well in school, they'll be able to go on beyond school. If they do, you can figure out how to pay to get them there. Being able to take home your mom after dad passes away and hope your children never have to take care of you. And have a little breathing room. Well, guess what? Farmers here and other places around the country don't have any breathing room. There's no breathing room left. Very little breathing room. Debt is way, way, way up. Why? Why is it happening? Well, it's happening because of the ridiculous policies he engaged in, and well as what he, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of trade policy. He's gone after the Chinese the exact wrong way. It had nothing to do with the fact that we had a deficit or whether we had a deficit in terms of agricultural trade. The fact he should be going after China for is they steal our intellectual secrets. They're engaged in trade policy overall that is designed to take over America's. If you have to invest in China and you're going to go invest in China, you got to make sure you have a 51% Chinese partner. And they're still in the profit. They're still in the profits. We're thinking all short term. And so we got to get a lot tougher, but not the way he has. Last thing I'll say before we get to questions is, look, where I come from, the worst thing you see is worry about is your kids deciding they have to leave to go get a job somewhere else, leaving everything they know. That happened to me years and years and years ago when I was a kid, when my dad had to leave because there were no jobs. But my point is that we, in fact, we have an opportunity to make rural America 20% of the folks in America live in rural America. But the fact is that we have an opportunity to make it really prosperous, to bring people along in big ways. Start off, we're going to get into this, I hope, but start off by making sure that we understand what's happening in rural America. Hospitals are closing all across rural America. And, and the lack of, not just, 60% of the people in a serious accident who die in rural America. They don't die in the cities. They don't die in the big towns. They die in rural America because of lack of access to health care. And look what's going on, the lack of health care for specialty services, for women, a whole range of things. And so there's a lot we can do. In addition to that, we have to invest in rural America. We invest in it because we can do it and make the place grow. And everybody grows when it happens. Kids in your schools and my schools in the southern part of the state, although we've made progress in Delaware, they don't have high-speed broadband. They're in a situation where they, in fact, are behind all the kids in the other schools around America. They're not in that circumstance. They're not able to do that. Businesses, you all decide when you're going to sell whatever you're growing on your farm. You should be able to make that decision immediately by having high-speed broadband. We, in fact, in a position where, look what's happening in rural America in terms of our schools. A lot of schools in rural America are, in fact, what they call Title I schools, schools where there is average lower income. Well, look what we're doing. We're missing a gigantic opportunity That's totally within our capacity to do it, to in fact educate our children better. We learned one thing. If a child gets to go to school at age 3, 4, and 5, in addition to kindergarten, it increases the University of Iowa and all your great universities here point out, it exponentially increases the prospect they'll do well, go through school, go through high school, go beyond high school. They're dealing with a trade or going on to community college or beyond. It's simple. It's simple. We invest in kids, they can do well. We have a lot of Title I schools where I'm from as well, and what's happened? We say that, well, Title I schools, we don't have an advanced placement test. The kids in rural America are as bright and competent and capable of any kids in America. And we don't treat it that way. How many advanced placement courses do we have? How many times do we challenge our children? They can step up to it when they're challenged. So there's so many things we can do if we invest in America. We invest in small towns. There's no reason why when we build all this infrastructure we plan on building, I'm going to build, I promise you, and I think other Democrats, if they got elected, would do as well. I'm going to build. What happens? You can build these communities, and by the way, they're safe, they're healthy, they in fact generate the kind of ethic that in fact America is all about. And so there's a lot to do. Rather than talk about it much more, I just say two things. The next president of the United States is going to inherit a divided nation, as well as a world in disarray. And with all due respect, there's going to be no time for on-the-job training. There's not going to be any time to do that. And you take a look at, and it's not a criticism of my colleagues, but the people I'm running that are the 847 people seeking the nomination today. No. The folks seeking the nomination, they've done a lot of good things. But I'm the only one that's ever passed major pieces of legislation across the board, whether it was Violence Against Women Act or making sure we had the Recovery Act for $90 billion and everything in between. The Chemical Weapons Treaty. I'm not like boom, 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 but the point is this is what I've been doing my whole career. Bringing Democrats and Republicans together to get things passed. And when the Republicans were in agreement with us, go out and just beat them. Not a joke, not a jest. I mean it sincerely. Go out and take the case to the community. Presidents are supposed to be able to persuade. And folks, it's something I've done my whole career. And it has to be able to be done now. I know my colleagues who are seeking the nomination say, well, that was the old days. Yeah, Biden did all those things, but things have changed. Guess what? If we can't unite the country, we're in deep, deep, deep trouble. The system calls for principal compromise. There is no way in which you can unite the country without reaching a consensus. And as I said, that's what I've done my whole career. The second reason is the last thing we need, there's going to be no shot for on-the-job training nationally. Whomever wins next better be able to command the world stage, stand up and make sure everybody in the world, leaders, know who he or she is, and he knows who they are. So there's no kidding. Putin knows who I am. By the way, that's why he's spending millions of dollars. I've learned three things. I've learned three things lately. Vladimir Putin doesn't want me to be president. That's why he's spending millions of dollars on these bots they have on, telling lies about him. He's taking pictures of people. His guys are going out there and taking pictures of decent people and have no idea their picture's going up. And then underneath they're having things saying Joe Biden's this, that, or the other thing, and they've never said it. Finally, Facebook took all those things down. But the point is they're spending a lot of money because they don't want me to be president. He knows me, and he knows I know him well. And so, number two, I've also learned that Kim Jong-un, the thug in North Korea, doesn't want me to be president either. The official state news agency put out, I don't know if you saw it, it was in the press, I guess it was last week, Joe Biden is a rabid dog and he should be beat to death with a stick. Okay. I consider that a high compliment coming from Kim Jong-un, who had his uncle's brains blown out sitting across the table from him. Look, and lastly, I learned one more thing, and you've seen it in all these hearings. Donald Trump doesn't want me to be the nominee. And he's risking total impeachment because of that. And folks, look, I think Donald Trump, I think Donald Trump knows what's going to happen if I'm the nominee. He's going to lose. He's going to lose. So, folks, as my mom would say, why don't I hush up and take whatever questions you want?
You keep the microphone. I've got one right here.
Oh, okay.
Thanks. How about another round of applause? Thank you so much. It is so great to see all of you, and I'm getting emotional. My name is Vicki Brenner, and my husband and Mike and I live in rural Madison County, and when we heard that you were going to be here in Winterset, we were extremely excited, and we are so honored to have you here. I will also tell all of you that I was excited because I thought my friend and MC of Madison County and our county party chair, Alan Fire, would be here to moderate, and he's out of town. And then I went into a complete panic. I know many of you know that I'm a retired teacher, and I ran for the state senate in 2018, but I was a first-time candidate. And it was the first time I'd ever been in a debate. It's the first time I ever did a forum. And the only thing I've ever moderated in my life is a classroom.
That qualifies you for everything.
So I think you, Vice President, have done this a time or two. So if I falter, you will hold me up, all right? So let's get started. If you don't mind, I have a couple of questions I'd like to start with. I am a retired teacher. And so this
I'm married to a retired
I know you are, and
but
I
you didn't retire.
And I sort of retired, and then I got real busy again. So,
I bet you did.
Broadband and internet access is a major problem in Winterset and in many parts of rural Iowa, specifically here in Madison County. It is so problematic that our community school district has partnered with local businesses to allow students to use the internet free of charge so they can finish their assignments if they don't have access at home. As president, what will you do to ensure that our students have the resources they need, especially access to internet, so they can succeed in the classroom?
Folks, I've been pushing this for a while, and at the end of our campaign, or end of our term in office, Brock and me, we almost got it done. And that is investing $20 billion in rural broadband. Now, the reason for that, that's nationwide. There's two reasons for that. Number one is your children and the children in rural America are as competent and capable. And by the way, they know how to, if everybody wonders, well, can they do it? Guess what? Watch a kid from his age on deal with a smartphone. And they make us all look like, what in God's name don't we know, right? So they're fully capable. And the deal is that we do not have it in most of rural America. And it puts our children at significant disadvantage, not a joke, significant disadvantage. And what I want to do in addition to the rural broadband is I want to make sure we do what I was able to get done in terms of access to computers and access to computers for people across the country. And I was able to convince some of the major producers of these computers to go in and put them in boys and girls clubs, because in a lot of places there's no, especially in inner cities, there's no access to this. The only safe place they can go in many cases is in a boys and girls club, and they can do their homework and get things done. So number one, the $20 billion is something that we can afford. I can explain how I'd pay for all this. I won't bore you now, but if you want to know, I will. But that's $20 billion nationwide. It will fundamentally alter the nature of how, in fact, students, and you know in your class how important it is. Second thing, though, is that in addition to that, as I said, in Title I schools and across the nation, if we move from spending $15 billion a year to $45 billion a year, we can do something that we're losing now. Your generation of teachers are starting to retire. We're already short 110,000 teachers nationwide. As the generation of baby boomers retires from teaching, it's expected that we will be short over 500,000 teachers in the next 10 years. What does that mean? It means all class sizes are going to increase. It means kids are going to get less access to learning. It means things are going to turn around. And one of the reasons they're not doing it is lovely young and brilliant young women like you are deciding you don't want to teach because teachers start off, I don't mean you personally, I don't know whether you do, that in fact students are, what happens is that teachers get paid for a 4-year degree on average 26% less than every other college graduate. And that's why we're losing teachers. That's why people aren't going into the profession. And so I believe that teachers should be able to make $60,000 a year. And what will happen is, with the proposal I have, rural teachers, inner city teachers, it doesn't matter, Title I teachers will be able to get, the first thing they have to do with that money that they get is increase teachers' salaries to make them competitive. Second thing they have to do is make sure that they, in fact, work on everybody 3, 4, and 5 years old be able to go to school. Not daycare, to school, because again, we've learned so much in the last 15 years. It significantly increases the capacity of a child to succeed. Thirdly, we should be making sure that in these schools we challenge our children. We make these stupid assumptions that if you're brown or black or you live in rural America, and there's totally different circumstances, but guess what? I don't think you're capable of advanced placement test. I don't think you're capable of taking advanced courses. Wrong. And so we should be able to challenge every child that to the best of their ability. So we should have these courses within these schools, these Title I schools, just like you have in the wealthy public schools and private schools, be able to access. Lastly, one of the things we should be doing is we should be talking about community-based schools. For example, taking the schools that we have in rural America and in suburban America and tying them up and coordinating them with businesses in the region, apprenticeships with the unions, as well as making sure that they deal with, for example, one of the things we did when Detroit went under, okay, the president asked me, he gave me all the great assignments. One was rescue Detroit. It was like, okay, bless me, Father, I'm going to do it. But all kidding aside, not a joke. And what happened was we found out that what happened in Detroit was an awful lot of people, when Detroit went bankrupt, the people who knew how to, for example, turn on the city water system and the lights and all the computerized stuff, they had all moved out, black and white. So we hired an outfit from out of town, a national outfit, that if you wanted to get somebody in the high-tech area, you'd go to them to find employees. We had them come in, and they went around the communities, and what they did was they insisted that they went out and found people in the communities who were willing to go back to school to learn how to program. And guess what? After a 15-week program, a course in the community colleges, and the government paid for it, what happened? Every single one of them had a job. Lowest starting job in the city, this city, was $45,000 a year. The highest paid job was $102,000 a year. And these were all, turns out to be all women, and they were all women of color, not one beyond a high school degree, most with GEDs. So this idea that we can't teach our children and people to move. And the second thing we did was we set up a program where you coordinate with the businesses in the community. And what do you most need? What do you most need? What kind of people do you need to most train? Connect them with the community colleges, bring in their people, and they bring in the technology they need, and we train people in 18 and 20-week programs to know how to do it. For example, you all have been in this state pioneers in wind and solar energy. But guess what? A whole lot of people don't know how to run a photovoltaic machine on a factory floor to make solar panels. But it takes 20 weeks to train somebody. You bring the machinery in, and they make between $45,000 and $60,000 a year. There's 100,000 jobs out there that aren't being filled in advanced manufacturing. And there's no reason why they can't come into the towns, come into the cities, come into the small rural areas. And it's the same way with what we should be doing, and I'll stop, with making sure that we provide access to help increase significantly the availability of money to start small businesses in cities, in towns, small towns. Because that's the place, and if you're a mayor, if you're involved in the community, what's the one thing when anybody decides they're going to build a small plant somewhere? Well, what access do you have to highways? How good are the highways? What access do you have to an airport? What access do you have to water? What access do you have to electricity? It's all about infrastructure. And so if we invest in the infrastructure, we can attract people into communities that provide good jobs where our kids get educated well here. I mean, by the way, remember the Iowa test? Mm-hmm. You guys used to be #1 in the nation. Mm-hmm. Not a joke. We all, nationwide. But guess what's happened now? Well, it's different. So my generic point is there's so much we can do that doesn't cost in relative terms a whole lot of money to revive not only the farm community, which I'll get into if you want to talk about that later, but significantly revive small towns and make them the center. Like I said, 20% of all Americans live in rural America, and they're being left behind in a big way. And they should be able to lead the way to the future, because there's more to work with if we invest the dollars.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I have one more question, and then maybe we can turn it over to the audience. This question is about rural Iowa again, and it's also about health care. Women's health care access in rural Iowa is very limited. Here in Winterset, the only access to an OB/GYN is at our clinic, offered once a month. I know because I called in today. And with the nearest full-time access being 40 minutes away. What will you do to ensure that women get the proper maternal care they need, especially in our rural areas?
First of all, almost all specialties in rural America are in short supply. And you got to wait a long time. It's hard to attract doctors and dentists and people with specialties to rural America. Not that they don't want to live there and wouldn't like the life, but the salaries, they don't get paid. And so 3 things that I would do. Number 1, we have to increase the amount of money we reimburse local hospitals for. For example, one of the reasons why I won't get into the Affordable Care Act and Medicare for All issue, but the reimbursement, Medicare rate reimbursement is not enough to keep the doors open. Literally, I go all over the country. I've spent a lot of time going into rural hospitals and taking a look. They can't keep the doors open. So you have to be able to reimburse these hospitals in a commensurate rate, whatever that takes, and it doesn't take a whole lot to make sure they can stay open and be profitable, number 1. Number 2, we should be investing in those specialties that are most needed. Not only is women's health a problem and access to it with docs without going miles and miles and miles to get there, but you don't have specialties for example, folks with addiction problems, folks who are in a position where they need a specialty for early childhood diseases. How do you get there? How do you make that happen? Well, the way you make it happen is you invest in doctors and dentists and specialists to come into rural America by doing 3 things. 1, you provide for them the ability to come in and make money by, number 1, if they're willing to go to a rural community where there's a shortage of doctors or specialty, you forgive their medical loans. You say you come in, you work here, you forgive your medical loans. And they're usually a significant amount of money that is owed. Secondly, you can have a rural fund that will compensate doctors for the difference between a doctor would make for a similar specialty in a metropolitan area and a rural doctor, a doctor that's in a rural community that's relatively small. And by the way, you all realize it, but I don't know that you know the statistic. 60% of all traumas that result in death occur in rural communities. 60%. 60% of the people have a trauma, falling off a roof, getting hit by an automobile, any trauma. 60% die in communities where there's only 20% of the population. It's because lack of access to care. It is able to be solved. If we're going to pay for some of the folks out there to be able to get a tax break for racehorses, we sure in God's name should be able to give people incentives to be able to go in and provide health care. And by the way, most doctors that I'm aware of, I have a son-in-law who's a medical doctor, they would just as soon live in a rural area that they liked, someplace where the quality of life, no, I really mean it, where the quality of life was what they looked for, where they could raise their kids and how they could do it. And so it's totally within our capacity, but we have to focus on specialties, specialists. And the second thing we have to do, I propose that we spend literally $100 million making sure we open more clinics clinics that specialize in this case, women's care, right off the bat. And there are also clinics that you don't have to have, some cities or towns, I should say, cannot accommodate a trauma hospital, cannot accommodate a full-blown hospital. We have rules that say that, in fact, if you only are an emergency room, then you get reimbursed a different way than if you're a hospital. And if you're a hospital with 20 beds and you have specialties, look, how many people you know have to make the decision, Mom needs an MRI. I have to drive to Des Moines. I have to go somewhere else. I can't get there. How's that? Well, the research we're doing now, they're talking about being able to build, through the research we're doing now, portable MRI machines. So they're available and travel through the communities on a regular basis. They have access to them on a rotating basis, but not months or years, but immediately. So there's a whole range. I know I can tell I'm beginning to bore you, but the fact is that there's a whole lot that's totally within our capacity to do to fundamentally change healthcare. And here's the biggest one. The biggest one is providing preventative care. Preventative care. How many people you know, because of lack of insurance and or lack of access, they don't want to have to drive 50, in many cases, by the way, I was just out in Wyoming, you have to drive sometimes 100 miles to get somewhere. For real. Or my former chief of staff was with me today. He's from Idaho. You drive hours to get help. But here's the deal. Imagine if you're in a situation where we make that kind of investment in focusing on how we get specialists into communities. And here's how you pay for it. One of the things that I know there's a big debate going on between me and my colleagues. They're all good folks. That about Medicare for all versus Biden plan, which provides Medicare for those who want it, and bills on Obamacare. Now, Obamacare, the proudest moment I had as United States Vice President was the passage of Obamacare. 5 Democratic presidents had tried it. No one had been able to do it. It gave over 100 million people with pre-existing conditions coverage. It allowed us to keep our kids, in fact, they're struggling on our health care policy, if we had one, until age 26. It provided for you being able to, we have added 20 million people to coverage for the first time. And what we wanted to do then, I'm going to do now, assuming if I'm the president. And that is that add a public option, a Medicare-like option to Obamacare. Restore all of the benefits that were stricken, number one. 2, further subsidize your ability to buy the so-called gold plan, so you never have to pay more if you can afford insurance. You never have to pay more than $1,000 in a year for a deductible. You're never in a position where you have a deductible. They say $5,000 for surprise bills from the hospital, et cetera, that are gigantic. Never more than $1,000, and where you fundamentally change the cost of drug prices in America. The drug companies have drastically increased prices. Any of you know anybody who needs insulin? Look what's happened. Well, seriously, there's some drugs that, in fact, have gone from costing $25,000 a year, which is way over anybody could pay, to $125,000 a year. Why? Not a single thing has changed. And so what I propose, and I will get done because the public is with me on this one now, because everybody's figured it out, is do a situation like they have in other countries, one in Germany. Bring together at the Department of Health, the National Institute of Health, experts from around the country, not working for the government, a panel of experts that has to sign off on every new drug that is seeking a patent. And they have to do it in a way, look, all the new drugs, one of the big things we can do a great deal on is cancer. How many of you have lost somebody to cancer? Raise your hand. Okay. They said, by the way, we couldn't get things done. After Trump was elected in January, before he was sworn in, I was able to put together a coalition of Democrats and Republicans as vice president that provided almost $9 billion for medical research, $1.8 billion just for cancer. We're on the cusp of changing so many things we can do if we invest. For real. I mean, for real. We're so close. We're changing so many things. But here's the deal. If, in fact, most of those new drugs are bio-based drugs, not chemical-based drugs, and you have in many cases, you know, there's 204 specific types of strains of cancer. It used to be we thought there was one cancer resides in different parts of the body. Well, there's 204 distinct cancers that require different therapies. Now, we're in a situation now where if we, in fact, make the kind of investment we need to make, we can make fundamental changes in what we do and how we get things done and how we get it done and when we get it done. And so what happens is these new drugs, they tend to be drugs that only, if you all represent a different drug company, you all, in fact, are not spending the same amount of money on one particular drug you're finding. You come up and you invest and you find this new bio-based drug to deal with immune systems. Well, I met with these drug companies. You may remember with the Biden Cancer Initiative and the moonshot that I did for the president. I got all these drug companies together privately, and I said, didn't bring the press in. And I said, tell me, how do you think you should be compensated? They said, if the drug really works, we should be able to charge whatever we want to charge for it. So if you find a life-saving drug, the answer is I can take you to the moon. Wrong. Wrong. So what's going to happen under my administration, not a joke, we'll get this done, is you say this. Okay, you have this panel of experts come in and they say, this is the drug you have, in fact, invented, quote, you come up with, and it works. How much did you invest in the process? What was your investment? And we'll give you a significant return on your investment, not 5%, a significant return on your investment. But you cannot charge any more for that drug than the price we set. That's the price we set. And for the rest of the time, unless you make a fundamental change in that drug, you cannot increase the price more than the cost of medical inflation. We will drive down the cost of drugs significantly, and there's no way they're going to move, because if they don't, if they say, I'm not going to invent it, well, guess what? We're in a situation where we say, then you can go overseas, you can go anywhere and purchase any drug for the price that's overseas, which is considerably less, assuming the Federal Drug Administration says it's safe. That's all. And allow Medicare to go out and negotiate drug price. You realize right now, Medicare is the biggest purchaser of prescription drugs. Well, guess what? They can't negotiate with the drug companies how much they're going to pay. But if you allow Medicare to, in fact, say, we're only going to pay you X amount of money, I'm going to make a ridiculous comparison. We're only going to pay you a penny an aspirin instead of 20 cents an aspirin. Well, guess what? They either do that or we go somewhere else. We go overseas and get it. I promise you, you will see, as we say in southern Delaware, where I speak with an accent, those boys will have an altar call pretty soon. But I mean, so I guess what I'm trying to say to you, these aren't radical things. These are within our wheelhouse. We can do them because guess what's happened? Because of the abuses of this administration allowing things to move in the way they have, the American public's going, whoa, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And by the way, I know you all benefit from the $1.9 trillion tax cut. Raise your hand. You all did really well, right? I mean, come on. So my point is there's a whole different environment in which we can do these things. There's much more to say, but I'm not going to go on any further. I'll go to other questions.
Okay. What do you think? Are we ready to go to the audience?
Well, I'm ready to go to the audience.
All right. Oh, wow. We had a lot of audience participation. Yeah, we have microphones everywhere. Let's go with you, sir.
Can you get a mic over? Okay.
Hi, Joe. Your candidates that are running for the Democratic Party, fine people. All the issues you've discussed here today and in the debates are issues that I know that you're going to solve. In my opinion, you are our best hope for the Democratic Party to beat Trump. Now,
this was not a setup.
No.
Thank you.
This is
now here comes the hard part.
This is Alan's first time I've ever done anything like this in my whole life. That's the truth. My concern is like a coach what is going to be, because you will be the Democratic candidate, you're the best person we have for integrity and the issues that need to be covered in this country, both foreign, domestic, and medical. What is going to be your strategy when you deal in a debate with Mr. Trump?
Really good question.
Are you prepared to handle that without giving away secrets? Like a Saturday Night Live deal, or maybe I'm asking something that we shouldn't even discuss yet.
It's a totally legitimate question, because I'll just be honest with you. I just did the Don Lemon show before I got here. I was in South Carolina. I flew from South Carolina, and he taped the show. It's on tonight. He said, people are wondering whether or not, Joe, you are you tough enough, because you don't seem to be as combative as you used to be. And I said, yeah, but it's a different story when you're dealing with your own folks in a debate. And by the way, these aren't debates; they're 1-minute assertions. And if you notice, every day we have, the numbers go down, down, down. It started off 24 million people watching. The last debate, 6 million people watched nationwide. I think it's anyway, that's another story. But what I don't want to be part of is I don't want to be part of what Barack calls President Obama. He's a close friend. I don't want to confuse him when I say the president with this president we have, okay? But what I found is that, as he said, what we don't want to do is form a circular firing squad. So I've not been nearly as aggressive in the debates, because I just pointing out the other person's weaknesses, I just think just continually undermines the Democratic Party in the narrative. And but look, I'm used to dealing with bullies. I am used to dealing with people who abuse power. I grew up as a kid who used to stutter, and and I realized, and I overcame it by the time I got out of high school. But the fact is that I know what it feels like to be marginalized. When you talk like that as a child, as a kid, everybody just makes fun of you. And I was a pretty good athlete. I'm not very big, but I learned how to fight. My rule was, you can beat me, but I'm going to hurt you. You all think I'm kidding. I'm not. But anyway, but here's the point. Donald Trump, I'm not going to stoop to his level. But I tell you what, I'm going to be very, very clear about who he is and what it is in a debate. One of the things I'll say that you can make a judgment on, I've done several national debates. They turned out pretty well. Paul Ryan will tell you how well it turned out. And you can do it without being mean. You can be firm. This is the most corrupt president we have had. He talks about corruption. No. And like I said, people thought I was being a little hard on him. Remember, I've been criticized, understandably, by some Democrats that all I talk about is Trump. They say, well, you're sounding like you're being presumptuous. You're the only guy that's going to run it. That's not the reason. I don't want to be fighting with Democrats. We disagree, and we do disagree. I strongly disagree about spending $35 trillion on Medicare for all in 10 years. That's $3.5 trillion a year, more than we spend on everything else in the entire government. Everything. Every single solitary thing. And it's not realistic. And people don't get to choose. 160 million people out there like the policies they have. And if they don't like it, then they should have an option to buy into Medicare, which I propose, but not everybody being forced. In the neighborhood I come from, we don't like the government telling us what we have to do in terms of a choice. But my point is this. Trump is, he says he's concerned about corruption. Like I said, bless me, Father, for he is. But here's the thing. People thought I was too tough on it. I said, look, I've released 21 years of my tax returns. I came to the United States Senate as the poorest man in the Senate because I got elected when I was 29 years old. I left listed as the poorest or one of the 3 poorest people in the Congress. When I got named as vice president. One of the wags said, "It's probable no man has ever assumed the office of vice president with fewer assets than Joe Biden." I hope they weren't talking intellectual assets. And I left the way I came without making a penny, other than my salary. It was just a generous salary, a generous salary. But I say to Mr. Trump, "Mr. President, I released 21 years of my tax returns. You talk about corruption. Release yours or shut up. Period. Just release yours." But I'm not going to take, as my mother would say, his guff.
I am so sorry to tell you, we have time for one more question. I'm
Actually,
sorry.
I can do a yes or no maybe if you can ask me not an essay question.
Would you take as your running mate?
Are you available? Folks, it's very presumptuous of me to determine, pick a running mate. I don't even have the nomination yet, okay? And so if I said, and there's a number of extremely qualified people, I want my administration, like our last one, to look like the country, to reflect the country. And I guarantee you I'm going to have an administration made up of some of the most talented women and people of color that any administration has ever had. And ideally, and there are a number, and I always say, Joe Biden says that, he's the only one that can win, and therefore women can't. Well, look, there are an incredible number of qualified women, incredible number of qualified women. Not just the people who are running. I could start naming people, but the press will think that's who I picked if I were the nominee. But there's an incredible number of people. The former assistant attorney general who got fired was just in Delaware. The leader of the woman who should have been the governor of Georgia, an African-American woman who's incredibly good. The two senators from the state of New Hampshire. I mean, there's an enormous number of qualified people. And here's what I do know about what a vice president has to be, and I'm not being a wise guy. The reason why things work so well for Barack and me is, and why we became such close friends, you watch a woman or a man under intense pressure. You watch how they handle it. You get a pretty darn good read of their character. This man has enormous character, enormous character. I think he was a really good president, and I was proud to serve with him. But I find, if you notice, all the hits he's taken in the Democratic debates, like, whoa, where were these guys, and women? But my point is this. The thing I know you have to have is the next president of the United States, like the last Democratic president, this president doesn't anybody he can count on. There's nobody he completely trusts. There's nobody who trusts him, apparently. And I'm not being facetious when I say that. If you watch what he expects of his vice president, he just expects him to be obsequious. Yes, you're a great president, Mr. President. Tell the press that. That's no way to run a government. The next president, like all presidents in the future, are going to have so many major responsibilities, they don't have time to deal with it all themselves. They've got to have the confidence and the competence of a vice president that you can delegate significant authority. That's what the president did with me. When he gave me the assignment, he gave me presidential authority. He knew I would never violate his trust, but it required the threshold thing we needed. That we agreed, we were philosophically in agreement, and we strategically agreed on everything. We disagreed on tactics sometimes. And a vice president cannot be in a position where even in a cabinet meeting, he or she is taking on the president. And I would relate, that's why Barack and I had lunch once a week, why we spent time together all the time. Because we'd get in a room like he once said, having Joe, what's it like having Joe as a vice president? It's like having a big brother. He always tells me the truth. When he asked me why, I asked him why he wanted me to be vice president. He says, I know you'll never walk in the Oval Office and be intimidated. You'll tell me the truth, what you believe. And so we've had arguments. We've shouted at each other in private. But we always completely trusted each other. Completely trusted each other. So whomever I would pick were the nominee would have to be someone I knew was philosophically in tune with me, that was prepared to support what I ran on, why I ran, because that would be the reason I got elected, and not have any fundamental disagreement with me, even though they're entitled to that. But you have to have somebody. Think of the courage it took for the president to run the risk of turning over major responsibility for me to me in terms of Central America, in terms of chemical weapons, in terms of a whole range of things, and worried about the press saying, well, you know, Biden is the guy running this show and this thing. It took a lot of confidence. This guy knows who he was, who he is as president of the United States. And so you got to find somebody who you completely trust. Not trust to not say negative things to you. Trust that they'll tell you exactly what they believe. Exactly what they believe. And so that would be the criteria that I would use whomever I picked if I were lucky enough to be the nominee. Okay, I'm going to do, can you do something close to yes or no? Yes, ma'am. Can you give that lovely lady a microphone back there in the back row?
Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, if you are the nominee, how will you reach out to our fellow citizens who say, yeah, I don't like Trump's rhetoric, but I like his policies?
Well, I'm not going to be able to do much about that if they like his policies. Because, but I'm serious. It's a really important question. Look, everybody knows who Donald Trump is. Even the people who support him know who he is. Have you heard anybody brag about his character or his honesty? Or his decency? No, but if they're with him, they like, well, I like the fact that I got this gigantic tax cut. Or I like the fact that he does this or that. Or I like the fact that he likes white supremacists like me. I like the fact, but I'm not being facetious. What we have to do, what I have to do if I'm the nominee, is not, it's one thing they know who he is. I got to let them know who I am. And, you know, I have to make sure that people understand that I really do choose hope over fear. No president has ever led the country that wasn't optimistic and believed in the possibilities of this country, and in fact believed it from their gut, and didn't appeal to fear to lead, appealed to hope to lead. Secondly, I want to make sure they understand that I choose science over fiction. We have global warming. It's a real bad deal. And by the way, farmers are going to be the first group in the world to get to net zero, and they're going to be paid for being able to do it. Watch what happens. But here's the third thing. We also have to make sure, and it sounds silly, that we choose truth over lies. He's a serial liar. He's a serial liar. Now, the one thing that you never have to worry about me, which is you maybe should worry about, is no one ever doubts I mean what I say. I just sometimes say all that I mean. But they never wonder, no one's ever questioned whether or not I'm telling the truth of what I believe. And lastly, you got to be in a position where they understand that we're a country that has unlimited possibilities. Look, folks, all kidding aside, think about it. You know, we walk around as Americans kind of with our head down, woe is me, we're in terrible shape, what's going on, this is awful and all. What do we do? What do we do from here? With Donald Trump out of the way for real, think about this. We are better. I got elected, as I said, when I was a 29-year-old kid to the United States Senate from a family who had a 3-bedroom split-level house with 4 kids and a grandpa living with us. We weren't poor, but we were not anywhere near anything else wealthy. And, you know, I'm the first United States Senator I ever knew. Not a joke. And so what happened was I was always written about as this idealistic young optimist who just won. I give you my word as a Biden. I'm more optimistic about America's chances of owning the 21st century than I've ever been in my entire life. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why, though. I mean, think about it now. We got to remember who we are. This is the United States of America. Our workers are, in fact, 3 times as productive as workers in Asia. 3 times. Not a joke. Fact. Number 2, we have the greatest research universities, more research universities in the United States than all the rest of the world combined. And every major life-changing, altering thing has come out of a research university in the last 15 years. Monetized by businesses and corporations, but you own those universities. We own those universities. Nobody has the intellectual horsepower in one nation like we do. We really do. Third thing the United States says, we're the wealthiest nation in the world, for God's sake. There's so much we have the capacity to do. If we start to lead again by not the power, the example of our power, but by the power of our example. That's what's allowed the world to rally to us. Why do people come here? They come here because they believe that we are what we advertised ourselves to be. We hold these truths self-evident. All men and women are created equal, endowed by their Creator. We've never lived up to that completely. But we've always opened the aperture wider and wider and wider and wider, including people. And lastly, folks, think about it. We're in a situation in the United States of America that we have the capacity to do. There's not a single thing, from war to peace, there's not a single thing the United States has ever set its mind to, ever, that we've been together on, that we haven't accomplished. Nothing. Remember what everybody remembers when you were kids, you had to learn about John Kennedy's speech about going to the moon. The phrase I remember the most, and my colleagues in the Senate are so tired of hearing me say it over the years. He said, we're doing this because we refuse to postpone. I refuse to postpone any longer our capacity to fundamentally change the standard of living for Americans, to bring the middle class and working class people back up to a place where they belong, and to lead the world. The world needs us, because we need the world in order to keep from having chaos. And we're in the midst of a situation where, like I said, we're our allies. If he gets elected 4 more years, there'll be no NATO, I promise you. I guarantee you. There'll be no, and our alliances in Asia, look what's happening. It matters to us whether or not Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Australia, whether they think we're with them. Well, I can't deny you asking a question. So, all right.
Assertive about it. So, hi, we met prior to. Thank you. So, like before, I'm a veteran. I'm also a survivor of military sexual trauma. And fiscal year 2018, 20,500 service members were sexually assaulted. And 80% of females that get care at the VA report that they were either sexually assaulted or sexually harassed during their time in service. 80%. We're losing 22 veterans a day. MST survivors are twice as likely as their counterparts to commit suicide. So, as I've asked before, would you please, as President, sign into law the Military Justice Improvement Act, and also what we do to combat veteran suicide?
3 things. By the way, the number of incidences of sexual abuse since 2016 in the military have gone up by 40%. 40%. We're in a situation where we have more veterans, men and women, committing suicide per day than all of the people killed in combat now, today. When Barack and I were president and vice president, we began the process of providing for advocates for a person who alleges that they were sexually assaulted. Here's what happened. There's a debate going on as to whether or not, and I will set up a commission to settle this, just like we did. We set up a commission for the military to decide what to do with LGBTQ people in the military. I will set up a commission to report back quickly on the following. There's arguments that, and there's rationale. By the way, the single most dangerous thing that happens, I can tell you from my son in combat, is that the cohesion in a unit depends on certainty that you're going to be taken care of by the man or woman standing next to you. And when, in fact, somebody's been abused and physically abused badly, it fundamentally changes that cohesion. Those of you who served in the military, whether at the time you served there were women in combat, in fact, there are now. And you know what it means. It means everybody's in danger in that unit. But here's been the problem. The problem has been too many sexual assault victims have come forward with overwhelming cases, and the chain of command has been unwilling to do what they have to do, either because of time and or because of they just don't want. For example, I've will not go into a detail of who the persons were, but there are circumstances where they say, look, this person who committed that assault is one hell of a soldier. When you put him out on the field, he has been able to kill so many bad guys out there. So what am I going to do? What you got to do is court-martial him and put him in jail. That's what you got to do, throw him out of the military. But the question about, look what Trump is doing now in the chain of command. He is fundamentally altering it in a way that the military, I promise you, I know these women and men, this is what my supposed specialty is, national security and national intelligence issues and foreign policy. I promise you, they're outraged that he's gone in and just bypassed the chain of command and found and just commuted court-martials for 3 people who should have been court-martialed, should be held, and they're outraged by it. So what I would do is, if in fact this does not improve incredibly quickly, which I doubt whether it will when I'm president, is set up this commission and insist that the chain of command make a judgment whether or not you have to go outside the chain of command. But outside the chain of command. Now, here's what that means. It doesn't mean you don't have a military person making the judgment. It means that if you are the colonel, that you are in charge of the group, and there's a private who is in your command, or a captain or anyone else, a sergeant, and they're accused of having sexually assaulted someone under your command, there has been a reluctance, it seems on the face of it, to pursue that person. So the question has been raised by Senator Gillibrand when she was there, and is there, and it is that we go outside the chain of command. So you set up a commission that's within the military, independent of that unit. They come in and they make a judgment on whether or not it occurred, because they are less hands-on in terms of knowing the individuals there. The other thing we should do is increase the number, and he's walked away from us being able to have specialists for you that in fact walk you through it and are essentially your quasi-counsel as you go through this. And so, but look, one of the things, there's 2 things I have to admit to you I'm most passionate about. One is finding cures for cancer and other major diseases, which I think are within our realm. And the second is violence against women. I wrote the Violence Against Women Act. It took me a long time to get it passed. And it's fundamentally changed an awful lot of things. But here's the bottom line. When I wrote it, what I said, and some of you folks may not agree with me, but I'd rather not be president than walk away from this commitment. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Here's the deal. We have a cultural problem in America. A cultural problem in America. And the culture has to change. How many of you know, and it's not, I'm not, this, most people don't, how many know what the phrase rule of thumb means? Most people don't. I can tell you what it means. In English common law, because a woman was viewed as a chattel, just like the cows or the pigs or the horses or anyone else, a husband was able to chastise his wife physically and beat her, and in fact, for whatever thing he thought she did. So many women were dying in the late 1300s. I think it was 1392 in the common law. Don't hold me to the exact date. The late 1300s. That the court of common law, that's how English law works. It's not codified. It's a common law that keeps evolving. Court of common law said, it's because so many women are dying, you can no longer beat your wife with a rod thicker than the circumference of your thumb. When I wrote the Violence Against Women Act, which it took me over 5 years to get done. Initially, nobody supported it. Not a joke. Women didn't support it. The women's groups didn't support it, if you remember. The reason they didn't, they thought it would take away from the issues of choice and gender issues. But I went to the providers that, in fact, ran the shelters and and dealt with these women who were victims of rape and abuse. And they helped me get it passed, and it got passed. But I had my staff go back because I wanted to make a point to make sure everybody knew what was at stake. I had them look at every single state and the laws on the books that related to violence against women. And it was astounding what we found. It took 5 months to get it done. Every state. My state's a pretty progressive state. I used to be a public defender. I didn't realize that if God forbid somebody jumped out of an alley and brutally raped you, that person in my state could be charged with first-degree rape, which takes close to a life sentence. They can get up to a life sentence for it. But if you went out with someone you knew, and that person did the exact same thing to you, you could only be charged as a matter of law with second-degree rape. Implication, you must have known something about him. You must have somehow encouraged it. You must have done something. In the state of Texas, if a man walked in and found his wife in bed with another man, he could shoot and kill. Justifiable homicide. But if a woman walked in and found her husband in bed, and she did the same thing, it's murder. The point is, I mean, I can give you 50 examples, but here's the point. The culture has to change. And the last thing I'll say about this, because it goes beyond the question you asked, but is directly related to it. We have to change the culture in the military in a fundamental way. And look, folks, most men aren't abusers, but those who are abusers should be held accountable. Held accountable. And if you think about it, when you look at what's happening in America today, I said when I got the law passed over 25 years, this is the 25th anniversary of the passage of the law. It took me 7 years to get it passed. And it got passed with only 7 Republican votes, I might add. And here's the deal. If you think about it, what's happened is that if you are in a circumstance as a woman and you are violated, you have every right to expect there be justice. But here's what happens until I got the law changed. I guess the best way is to close with a specific example. There was a woman named Marley, you may remember this, that back 25 years ago was a woman who, in fact, was a model in New York City. And she lived in an upscale apartment building in the upper 60s in New York. And there was a restaurant bar in the bottom of it. And she kept going to her landlord, and she wanted to move out of efficiency to a one-bedroom apartment. And every time she talked to him, he hit on her. He tried to approach her. He harassed her. And so she just wanted her rent back. She said, I just want my deposit back, and I want to leave. She was a model, and she was on tour. I mean, not tour. She was doing a shoot in, I guess that's what they call it, in New York City. And she got a call from the landlord saying, I've got a one-bedroom apartment for you. You can have it. But meet me in the restaurant bar in the bottom of the hotel, in the bottom of the complex. And it's an upscale place. It's not going to, Charlie's Smoky House or something. I mean, this was a upscale place. And she walked in, and he hit on her again. She got up and walked out. But he had hired 2 thugs, and I'll bet when I tell you, you'll remember it, who followed her out and slashed her face with razors. Slashed her face to see to it that she'd ruin her career. And so they arrested the guy, and they went to trial. And he got convicted. But I asked her, I said, before you come, I want you to come and testify, because I was convinced if the American people understood what was going on, because women took great risk coming to stand before, 70 million people watching and testifying, because there's still this thing, the woman must have done something. I said, before you come, I want you to know what you're about to get involved in. I said, tell me, when your mother learned of this, what did she say to you? She said, why were you in a bar? Why were you in a bar? I said, what'd your girlfriend say? One said, I don't want to say it in front of the kids, but how short was your skirt? Did you have a bra on? What did you do? The assumption being that somehow she caused it. Folks, no man has a right to raise his hand to a woman under any single solitary circumstance other than self-defense. And so when this happened and all these testimonies came forward, I said when we finally passed the law, and I think you'll remember this, when I finally passed the law, got it passed, I had said, we're going to find, and it ties back to ending where you ended, we're going to find that women who are habitually abused by their partner or by a boyfriend or by someone they know are suffering from post-traumatic stress just like a soldier does. If a husband thinks that every time he comes home and the meal's not on the table, he can smack his wife's head against the wall, that's no different than a man being on point or a woman being on point in the military, getting shot at repeatedly and waking up in night sweats. Well, everybody said I couldn't prove that. And they were right, I didn't. I couldn't. But guess what? The Center for Disease Control came along and said, you're exactly right. Women who have been abused find themselves where their immune system is compromised. They have a higher rate of heart attacks. They have a higher rate of a whole range of diseases, just like men do coming home from war. So, folks, we've got to change the culture. It's changing. It is changing. But we got a lot of work to do. And the biggest is in that area. Last question.
You want a yes-no question, so I'll give you a yes-no question. Can you get the Democratic Party, all of your opponents, to agree and talk about how Trump is shredding the Constitution? Because I've read too many articles where the impeachment hearing and things are starting to actually dip down. They're starting to go from 70% of the people to 50 to whatever. If you guys on those debate stages or when you're in these conferences talk about how Trump is shredding the Constitution, then maybe they might understand what the importance is behind this thing.
Well, I think the answer is yes. Here's the deal, guys. Donald Trump, when he was running, he said, I could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and get away with it. He meant it. Because he's been able to buy his way out of, cheat his way out of, bully his way out of, whatever it has been. This guy is shooting holes in the Constitution like no president in modern history has done, including Richard Nixon. I was there for that impeachment, and I was there for the impeachment related to Clinton. Folks, this is above and beyond. And that's what I take you back to my comment before. We've got to stop this circular firing squad. We've got to explain to people why we are running, why it's so important to change. And I make a commitment that whomever the nominee is, we'll support. No matter whomever the nominee is. We can disagree on policy, and we should vent that disagreement on policy. We should let, this is where I stand, this is where you stand, make a choice. I think my health care plan is better than your health care plan. This is what I do in education. But we should stop what is going on now. You actually had, I won't mention him, but you actually had one candidate running who in 2012 thought that Barack should be primaried. Okay. You listen to some of the stuff on the stage, and you wonder, wait a minute. 100 years of experience on the stage, and look at terrible shape we're in, and look at all. It kind of undercuts everything that's been done. And so much has been done until this guy came along. We're in a position to move from restoring some dignity to the presidency, restoring the economy and starting to move back again and grow, with a president who, in fact, let me put it this way. How many times have, when a president of the United States has come on the air, on television, you have pulled your child or grandchild away from the television? Not a joke. Think about it. Think about that. Just think about the language. I was really proud to serve with Barack. And one of the things that is not because we become close friends. I mean, this is a guy who gave me more credit than I ever deserved. Said it was the best decision he ever made, and gave me the Presidential Medal of Freedom with distinction. Only 3 other people have gotten it ever in history. And so he's been extremely generous to me beyond what is warranted. He was making a speech, I think he was in Toronto, Canada. This was 2 years ago. And I was on the book tour about my son. I wrote a book about my son. I see one of you had the book here. And I was in California on this book tour. And we were both asked, totally coincidentally, the same night, what are you proudest of in your administration? And I said, the thing I'm proudest of is serving with a man where there was not one whiff, not even a whiff, a scent of scandal in 8 years. Not one. Not one. And secondly, without us ever having talked about it, he said the same thing when he was up in Toronto the same night. Folks, we've got to restore the soul of this country, and Barack Obama is part of that soul. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. On the